hurts.
Welcome to this 30-minute panel on SDG Live, the SDG Media Zone, on youth and inequality. I have three outstanding women with me, one of whom has her birthday today, and we let you guess who it is and which birthday it is. Right next to me is Nikki Fraser, indigenous rights activist from Canada. Next to her, Natalia Khanim, Assistant Secretary General with UNFPA. And then at the very right, Haley Gleason from the International Planned Parenthood Foundation. I'm going to let them speak for their own work and for their own background rather than introduce them. My name is Andreas Carsten. I work with a think tank called Youth Policy Labs in Berlin, a city which still welcomes refugees and in a country with a leadership that is not quite as crazy as this one. Youth and inequality, big topic, of course, here at the ECOSOC Youth Forum. And my first question to all three of the speakers is, the young people that you work with, sometimes indigenous young women, sometimes young people more generally, sometimes in one country, sometimes in 150 countries around the world, what are the major inequalities that they currently face? What are they struggling with? Nikki.
Well, first, my name is Nikki Fraser in Squest from Kamloops. That's in my language. And I am a youth representative for a national Indigenous women's organization in Canada. And that organization represents exactly what you're saying, is to fight for those inequalities and to make sure that our girls and our future are protected and empowered and educated. And that's just one of the things that our girls are lacking, is education. And
Natalia, we go from Canada to the world in one swift move. 150 countries, the United Nations Population Fund, a big organization. You're responsible for the program. What are the key issues young women and girls face today?
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say how delighted I am to be here supporting young people in their passion for the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm really proud to be with these two young women who are leaders in their own right, but who also represent the partnerships and the alliances that we need to make sure that the mandate of UNFPA, everywhere we work around the world in the 150 plus countries, it's to ensure that every pregnancy is a wanted pregnancy and that every childbirth is safe for the mother and the newborn. And furthermore, that the potential of every young person around the globe be fulfilled. So we're really proud that the ICPD mandate, the International Conference on Population and Development, which took place in 1994, was renewed 20 years later in 2014. And a lot of the thinking that went into equality and women's position, gender equality, is part and parcel of what we're doing with the SDGs. And that young people are really taking up their responsibilities and making their wishes known, and we're fully in support of an equitable planet that they will be proud to inherit.
Thank you. Then Haley, you work for a project that looks at 12 countries specifically. What are the inequalities young people face there?
Sure. So as Andreas mentioned, so I'm with IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, but I'm here today representing a project called ACT 2015, which is a partnership between IPPF, UNAIDS, a coalition called the PACT, which is about 26 youth-led and youth-serving organizations based all over the world. And essentially what ACT 2015 is about, a new push for meaningful youth engagement in the HIV response and in sexual and reproductive health and rights more generally. And I think in terms of the HIV response, as we all probably know, women are at much and especially trans women as well, are at really significant increased risk of HIV transmission. Young people, they still don't have HIV. Only about 34% of young people actually have accurate knowledge of HIV transmission and how to protect themselves. And yet it's also the biggest killer of adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's something going on there. And I think in terms of inequality, women, they often face kind of policy barriers. So in some countries there are policies that require, for example, women to get their husband's consent to access health services, which is going to massively restrict women's right to access healthcare. And again, only about 35% of, in a study, only 35% of women in sub-Saharan Africa said that they were actually able to make autonomous decisions over their own health. So I think this inequality is really playing out in health outcomes. So that's what we're trying to do by increasing youth participation and making our voices heard. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the whole question of sexual and reproductive rights has followed the United Nations for a very long time. I mean, it's a little bit frustrating, really, to see how many of the conventions, even at something that is, in the scale of things, relatively unimportant as a World Youth Conference, still get stuck about that particular issue, you know. So world leaders and member states out there, if you in 2017 still think that young women and girls don't have a right to their own body, you're part of the problem, and we judge you, and history will as well. So given all these inequalities, why don't you tell us about one project, and I really mean one project only. You know, we only have half an hour. This is social media. We're supposed to be quick. So one project only that you're particularly proud of, that you've worked on. Yeah.
So recently I was selected to be part of Royal Bank of Canada's Make 150 Years Count. Canada's celebrating their 150 years birthday, and I was given $150 to do something great within my community, and I chose to put an Indigenous aspect on it. And so I said, we survived, Indigenous people, 150 years of colonization. So that's one project I'm really proud that I'm working on, and it's going to get youth, Indigenous youth within my community to say, what is it like to be an Indigenous youth in Canada 150 years later. So that's one project I'm really proud I'm working on right now, and that should be done by the mid-February. So I'm going to be posting that on social media.
Super cool. And I love that you didn't mention the fact that you interviewed your Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, which in the youth sector, and maybe beyond the youth sector, you know, people are a little bit starstruck with him, also because he declared himself not only the Prime Minister, but also the Minister of Youth. He took the portfolio for young people in the country. So you interviewed him, and you didn't mention that that was something you're particularly proud of. Perfect. I love that. Okay. Then, Haley, tell us about a project you're working on that you're really proud of.
Sure. So with Act 2015, it's been going on since 2013, and it started off as a way, young people saying, you know, we want to make sure that our priorities are reflected in the post-2015 development framework. So kind of, for example, one of the countries that we work in is Mexico, and Mexico was one of only 2 countries that had an official youth delegate on their delegation to the intergovernmental negotiations, which actually is Tanya, who's right here today as well. So that was something that was really cool and really good to kind of give youth platform a voice. And here today, kind of now that the agenda's been decided, it's about accountability and involving young people in accountability around the follow-up and the review. So we've sponsored 6 young people from 6 different Act 2015 countries who are all at this meeting, and we're trying to can be involved in the high-level political forum as well. So we already held a meeting in India last October where the Minister of Health committed to us that she would involve young people in India's report, the voluntary review at the HLPF in July, which was really awesome for us and really testament to the advocacy work that was going on through the Indian Alliance. And we're also in discussions with Kenya and Zimbabwe, so this forum's been really helpful for us as well. We have young people from Kenya and Zim here, and we're already talking about how they can be part of the consultations around the voluntary review. So I think we're kind of really making changes. That's something that I'm really proud of.
Right, thank you. It sounds really cool. Now, Natalia, you have the whole power of an organization at your fingertip and have to choose one project that must be either very hard or is very easy.
Well, in fact, it's easy.
There you go.
At the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, we have the power of the presence of our executive director, Dr. Babatunde Oshotimehin, at Dr. Babatunde. And he did something that's been decisive for UNFPA, and that is to focus on the girl that was 10 years old last year when we started the path, who is going to be 30 years old by the time the SDGs come to fruition. So our projects center around imagining the strategy for the next 15 years that, working in partnership with others, we're going to evolve so that if we're working on data, which is the strength of UNFPA, we can count the 10-year-old girls. That's how we know this is the biggest youth generation ever. Our population studies are also showing us that certain trends that damage this 10-year-old girl, for example, early marriage, being forced to marry against your will, or just because of custom, teenage marriage, teenage pregnancy, can have a long life effect on the girl's self-image and on her enjoyable sexuality and a reproductive health of her choosing how many children, when to have them. So the concept of the needs of the 10-year-old girl means we work with other UN partners, UNAIDS, of course, UNICEF, of course, WHO, of course, and that UNFPA is really leading the charge. So the MDGs era improved certain things. It certainly did not improve to the degree that we wanted death in childbirth. So a lot of that is because mothers are pregnant too young. It all fits together with ending fistula, with making sure that female genital mutilation is something that by 2030 we're not even going to be debating, and also being inclusive so that people make decisions about their communities and that we can support them at the national level and at the community level. So I think our project to envision the world for the 10-year-old girl by 2030, UNFPA should contribute to improving those statistics. We should be vocal and visible in championing things that really make a difference for that 10-year-old girl. Education. She needs to be part of the economy of her community. And she, like you were both alluding to, needs to have that decision-making power. And it's never too young to start, but we chose 10 so that by the time she's 25, we're following 10-year-olds from all different countries, and Canada happens to be one of them. Actually, Canada chose their own 10 as well, so that we are, with the parents' permission and with the girls' agreement, every year we're going to see how is the world treating them and their peers. That's my favorite.
Oh, I totally can relate to that. And it also brings something that the United Nations are not particularly good at to the forefront, telling stories, you know, taking a narrative to the important work that the organization does. So that's quite amazing to see. Now, we are, you know, this is practically a private conversation. Let me ask you a tougher question, right? So now we have talked a little bit about what fascinates you about the work, but then pick one thing that really frustrates you. One thing that is so frustrating in your work about young people and inequality that, you know, it blurts out into the mic. In whichever sequence you like. Hey,
Sure.
you know.
I do know.
I see it right there.
I do know. And anybody who's been a youth advocate or worked with young people will know as well. And it's tokenistic engagement of young people, 100%. People kind of doing lip service saying, you know, we had young people at this meeting, but, you know, what were they contributing that was meaningful? And we often find, for example, oh, you know, we're going to involve young people in this consultation, so we've simplified everything and we've made it less technical. But some young people don't need that. We can also understand technical documents. We don't need to have a kind of dumbed-down version of the adult advocacy, which is very frustrating. And I think, again, it's also sometimes I've been approached or I've been asked, oh, you know, will you attend this panel and speak about this and this and this and how you agree with this? You're telling me what to say as a young person. You're not even giving me kind of expertise over my own life. So that to me is extremely frustrating. I think it happens everywhere, and I think that is a really major barrier to progress, because we're not actually understanding youth experiences. We don't actually know what's going on, because people, they listen but they only hear what they want to hear, and they're not going any deeper to look at the kind of systemic issues that mean that young people can't progress as quickly as we should be. So that came out a bit angrier than I expected. But I think it's right. I think we should be angry about it.
Totally. And I mean, you know, and in some of these meetings, even there are people sitting who think that this kind of tokenism is actually worth something, you know, and who haven't even discovered yet how problematic that actually is. I mean, let's not talk about this. This anger is going to drive me crazy. Nikki.
So I just want to add on to that, and that's something that I sit on a few boards where a youth representative is at the table, but our voice is kind of ignored, and we're there as just this token that, yeah, we have a youth there. So I sat at those tables and I banged my fist and I said, I am here and I'm a voice and I have an opinion, and so I can definitely relate to that, and it does happen in our own country, and I always ask that you listen to our voice, because we're the ones that are inheriting your outcome, your decisions. We're inheriting that. And I liked what the Envoy of Youth said. No matter how old you are and no matter how experienced you are, you're never too old to learn from a young person. And I think that needs to be spread far and wide, and I'm going to carry that quote with me forever.
Yeah, he had a few good quotes today in his last speech in front of the UN ECOSOC forum. Too many institutions and countries keep treating young people like a footnote.
Yes.
Thank you, Ahmad.
Yes.
They do. Not UNFPA, though, most of the time.
Well, I think the frustration that I would like to put on the table is the question of, from the standpoint of the Population Fund and youth involvement, the humanitarian crisis that is multiplying. I really think that the new Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has put on the table SDG number 16. Peace and institutions that promote peace are really going to be important for young people to be able to continue to defend this planet, whether we're talking about climate change, whether we're talking about community issues. The fact is that the humanitarian and fragile context crisis situations increasing doesn't give young people the stability that they really need to be able to have a fair shot at life. And so I think that's what redoubles my efforts personally, but also the efforts of our part of the UN, working together in a multilateral, which does have the advantage of bringing dialogue to the table. So many of you might know that Security Council Resolution 2250 speaks to this dimension of young people being encouraged to participate in peace processes and to have a voice to hopefully end conflict and bring much more of a peaceful resolution to conflict when that exists. So continuing frustration, and I'd like to hear some encouraging news on that front in the next few months.
Oh, wouldn't we like that all? I can also put a frustration on the table, right? Let's be fair. I find it really, really deeply frustrating how around the northern and western hemisphere, all of a sudden we see governments where I have the feeling it's white old men taking the reign for a last time and trying to destroy as much democracy and as much heritage as they possibly can. You know, you look at something like the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom, where the majority of young people wanted to stay in the European Union and they were outvoted. You look at what's happening in the country that's surrounding us at the moment here at the United Nations, and you can just shake your head and wonder how that ever came about. You know, it feels like there is autocracies all of a sudden re-emerging, and that's certainly something that young people around the world do not want, and that are very frustrated by, and it's a frustration I feel growing strongly. It has something positive, though. It politicizes and repoliticizes entire generations. I mean, I arrived in JFK day before yesterday to huge protests. Trump has done something. It was a joke on social media, fittingly. Let's quote it. He has done something that nobody has ever managed before. New Yorkers have gone out all the way to JFK without having to. And so, if then we turn these frustrations around into maybe something positive to end our little conversation on hopefully a positive note. So, if overnight all your problems disappeared and the wonder had happened, what ideally would you like to be doing for, it's not a wonder like youth and inequality has disappeared, but let's say the constraint that you often face in your organization, be they budgetary, be they political, be they human resource related, they had all gone. What is it? What's the most powerful project that you would like to be working on? Is that a nasty question? You have one.
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Yeah? Natalia, you have one?
Well, I can start because I think as we speak here, we're really trying to imagine what the future could be. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about this in my agency because of the stickiness of our mandate. Some may be hostile towards it. I will say, and I must say, as Andreas will appreciate, that we work closely with all our member states. So whatever the persuasion, whatever their electorate does, whatever the national platform is, we look for ways to work within those constraints. And as the United Nations, we must. So we really do represent the power of dialogue. Whether people agree 100% or not is not the issue. We are actually international civil servants at the service of a member state. So for me, if all the constraints and, my coffers were full, I really would like, again, every young person, and here I'm talking about girls and boys, to understand their body, because a lot of young people are woefully, from my perspective, neglected, because we're not giving just basic facts and information on the birds and the bees, if you will. They can be victimized. If a girl or a boy understands themselves and their sexuality and their anatomy, that gives so much power. I also feel that I would do everything in my power to support the ability of young people to access respectful care. So whenever they walk into a clinic, whenever they walk into an environment which is supposed to provide them services, all of the things that you've been putting on the table would vanish, and they would just be treated like a human being that deserves what they came for. So slowly we're making strides in that direction. It's not fast enough, but I really think part of the keys to working on something like HIV, to working on something like ending child marriage or FGM, is that we have to appreciate the humanity of the young person to decide for themselves. So you said, imagine I had all the resources at my disposal, and that's what I would really, really want.
And it's amazing how simple, yet not simplistic, and how powerful that notion is, and how much human dignity sits in that notion, right? And I find it important that we remind ourselves of these things. It gets so easy being frustrated and so easy also getting stuck in the daily grind of our work, and we all have a lot of work to do and all of that. But it's really powerful to hear that, and
Yeah, so I'm going to blame just even the thought, imagine there's no constraints. I was like, I physically can't imagine, because, and especially in international development and youth development, we are always working constraints. So the idea that we would just be free to do whatever we want is something that we're really pushing for, but I don't even know what it will look like. But I think ultimately the goal is to have every young person, wherever they are, whoever they are, to be able to make a decision over their own body, whatever they want, and to have all the information that they need. So comprehensive sexuality education for us is a huge, huge push. And so ideally, every young person in the world would grow up with age-appropriate sexuality education and knowing about their body, and also exactly like you just said, being able then to access services. So there's no point teaching about something if you can't then go and act on it. So being able to access services. And for us as well, it's young people at every single level of decision making. So wouldn't it be great if at the high-level political forum next year, every country has a young person on their delegation? Because, again, like Nikki said, the decisions that are being made in forums like this one, the biggest impact is going to be on young people. And when you were talking about the Brexit vote, which I still can't get over, there was a lot of analysis of the data that basically was maybe we should take all the votes and split them by age, and then see how much longer will that person have to live with the repercussions of this vote. Because it's young people that are going to be living in the post-Brexit society, as it's being called, for the rest of their life. And so, I fully believe that if young people had been involved with all of those discussions, and also being told that their voices matter enough, because the other reason that young people were outvoted is because they didn't show up to the polls, because maybe they've grown up in a place that tells them that their voice doesn't count and that there's no point, that their vote's not going to make a difference. So, ultimately it's just being able to have control and being able to make decisions, which it shouldn't be such a difficult thing to ask for, but we're still fighting for it.
No, it isn't, and the fact that we fight for it somehow is actually ridiculous. That, but there we go. Nikki.
So I would envision, like, I had a discussion with one of my peers, and he is a youth worker as well, and he said the goal is to work our way out of a job. So working our way so that our youth don't need that support, that they already have it at their disposal, and they do. It's just empowering them and just to support them. So, and again, what you said about having a voice at that table, I want to echo. What I see is having more young people running in big, high-level positions like that, so that it's not an old guy sitting there making these decisions. So, yeah, that's what I envision.
And just to add one thing as well, I mean, obviously, as we know, the way that the 2030 agenda is set out, it talks a lot about young people, and youth is kind of a cross-cutting issue across the whole agenda. And the theme of no one left behind as well is really important in addressing inequality. But even the wording of that, don't leave young people behind, puts it not in the hands of young people, it's in the hands of other people to bring young people along with them. And so that even that wording is kind of young people we can make ourselves not be left behind. We can run to the front and pull everyone else. It doesn't need to be other people kind of coaxing us along and making sure we're catching up. We should be driving the bus.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, totally. I mean, nothing to disagree here at all. I'm going to add a more humble wish. If we had no worries, no money disappeared all overnight. No, the money didn't disappear. The money appeared overnight. I would wish that every statistical office around the world had a dedicated youth unit, because unfortunately the lack of data regarding young people is absolutely terrifying. And you look at the SDG indicators and you start crying, because every indicator regarding young people is somewhere in tier 3 or just about in tier 2, which means that they have a terrible lack of data and terrible quality of data. And and there is a unit in all the statistical offices working on youth issues, and we actually get data on young people that illustrate what we're talking about. And yeah, that would be my wish, the researcher in me speaking. But there you go. I thank you very, very much for this great little conversation, SDG Live. You have all the Twitter handles, Nikki Fraser 1, Atayashi, Act 2015 Global, and Youth Policy. Ping us if you want to know more, and enjoy the afternoon.